We always said for quite some time that when it came to sort of Brexit and sort of the complications now of imposing and putting barriers of trade between us and our largest business partner, it was always going to be a significant problem. So we've already seen what has happened to British businesses, where they have seen a massive reduction in trade, and especially SMEs, or small medium enterprises. And these are the companies that were always going to get hit. They have seen either a complete stoppage in all of trade because their margins were very small to begin with. If you're sending a product, maybe your profit was, I don't know, 10 to 20 pounds. If you've now got to pay an extra 24 quid or whatever it is now on these things, your margin just gone like that. So exporting has now become incredibly difficult. And now the opposite is now true of importing from the EU. And we have seen businesses, garden centers, delis, main two things that we've been talking about when it comes to these, heavily stockpiling up to these, shall we say, new dates that have come in to be able to prepare for some of these things. And that is what, if you've been to your garden center recently, you will actually notice they're quite well stocked. Like, you will notice, or at least I noticed very recently, they are probably more well stocked than I have ever seen a garden center, or at least my local couple of garden centers around here have ever been stocked before. So, but as always, this stock doesn't last forever. And sooner or later, you are going to have to get in new stock. So, while initially these checks have now come in, we already know, guess what? There was a big computer problem. When they implemented these checks, the computer system was not working. So they were just waving all these things through anyway. Fantastic. We've got a, quote, world-beating system that doesn't even actually work. But anyway, we're going to cover some recent comments from a very, very big industry trade body here in the UK who are accusing the government of deliberately timing these checks in with the bank holiday to try and mask all these delays and red tape that is now going to be on these small businesses. And just as we saw, when all this stuff started happening with sort of the red tape of stuff going from the UK into the EU and the problems that businesses started to have, we will be inundated. I can guarantee you in the next couple of weeks, maybe give it a month, give time for these supplies to, run out, but give it some time and we will start to be inundated with very, very similar stories. So before we do get on into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the one of today's link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button. And of course, as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. And of course, on with the show. So this comes from The Independent with the title of New Brexit Border Checks, Chaos Masked by Bank Holiday Weekend as Businesses Face Delays and Red Tape. So the Director General of one of Britain's leading trade bodies has described Tory ministers as, quote, smart for using the bank holiday weekend to mask the impact of new Brexit border system checks, which is set to add to many delays and red tapes and cost to many imports. I know, cost to imports, which, bear in mind, Brexiteers said, oh no, once we're out of the EU, trade is going to be so much more easier. Well, guess what? We got that fantastic trade deal with Australia. No one's using it because it's, a country halfway around the world. Once again, Brexiteers do not understand international trade. And the very concept of trade gravity, that you always trade with your closest neighbors first. Who are our closest neighbors? It will be the EU. Anyway, Marco Forgione, the Director General of the Institute of Export and International Trade, was commenting now on the second phase of this controversial new border operating model, or BTOM, the system of the checks of animal and exports, which was introduced on Wednesday, the 30th of April. They said there have already been reports of garden centers and other businesses now stockpiling plants and other goods to avoid this initial chaos of the system which was brought in as a result of Brexit. He said to the Independent, the government was smart to introduce these checks on its bank holiday in the EU, as there is a reduction in traffic. The point is, what will happen now in the coming days and weeks is a lot of businesses will also complete their movements before the checks came in. Inventory management, you might call it stockpiling. I love it. As your garden centre or local delicatessen being involved in some inventory management wouldn't surprise me in the least. But he also admitted that the bottom delays are also likely to have an impact, especially on small to medium-sized businesses that could now struggle to stay afloat as a result of these changes. And it is all down to the margins. A lot of these businesses do operate with incredibly small margins, and a lot of people really, really don't understand sometimes like the size of a business might operate on. It might be in the hundreds of thousands, but what's the business's operating cost? Yeah, it looks like the business makes a lot of money on paper, but there are operating costs, wages to pay, all these things that a business needs to in order to run. And if you're now exporting and you've got all these extra costs on, well, now exporting, importing becomes a bit cost prohibitive. What do you do if you then suddenly can't import one of your, an item you need to make one of your big products? Of course, becomes a bit of a problem if you reach that point. And don't worry, I can almost guarantee you phone call for the future. There will be some form of problem like this in the future that we will probably end up seeing happen. Would not surprise me. So this despite Brexiteers' promises that doing business would now be even easier after leaving the EU and that there will be more opportunities. Remainers have always warned that putting up barriers with Britain's biggest trading partner posed a major risk. Gee, who knew? Who knew we were right all this time? Anyway, Mr. Forgione, who's frequently consulted by the Business and Trade Secretary Kimi Badnoch, said that the biggest question is now what happens to those small traders and producers for whom the costs of these potential delays are now significant. For some businesses, this is pretty much their margin. We have had conversations with a number of producers and wholesalers who move product, particularly Polish products, such as sausages. One haulier estimates now an additional cost to them will be £1.5 million a year. So think about that. If you're that haulier, you've now got an extra £1.5 million a year to add on. How much does that eat into your profits and things like this? One of the things you are going to see as a result of Brexit, small businesses, medium-sized businesses who cannot eat that, potentially, you're looking at going out of business, or maybe you cut somewhere else. Maybe you reduce the size of your staff to be able to accommodate some of these things. Job losses. We will see this in the coming year. We won't have the data probably until like this time next year, but would not surprise me if you saw a significant increase in redundancies and job losses as a result of these checks coming in. Would not shock me if there is an interesting data point, but like I say, we probably won't find that out at least for another year. Again, with all the data collection and stuff that goes on. But anyway, he continues. So this is either going to now result in increasing costs for UK customers or shrinkflation for accessibility issues. The reality is that the implementation has been, unfortunately, quite poor. I know, quite poor. They let him get off quite easy. To be honest, it's been incredibly shocking, really. But anyway, back to it. So the reality is that the implementation has now been, unfortunately, quite poor with regard to the engagement with businesses, making quite clear what is happening and when, with enough time and sufficient clarity for businesses able to plan. The introduction of the bottom is part of the, quote, Brexit plan to take back control of Britain's borders. The third phase of the model is to be introduced in October. Bottom sets out the approach to security controls applied to all imports, sanitary and phytosanitary controls applying to imports of live animals, animal products, plants and plant products as well. At the border, it now sets out all the controls, how they will be simplified and digested and digitized. and, of course, Britain's ambition for the UK's new single trade window. Again, the ambitious single trade window of everything just comes through this digital system. Isn't it all wonderful? Well, honestly, I don't know. Fujitsu strikes again. I don't even know if it is Fujitsu at this point. That has done this, but who knows? Because it broke down on the first day. I don't even know if it's still working at this moment in time, but it wouldn't be surprised me if it still isn't working or is broken down continuing since then. This has been a continuing problem that people trying to use this system that we talked about before in other things when this been being brought up. They are trying to learn how to use this system, and yet it's still really clunky, doesn't seem to work properly, and it's just, yeah. Do you think that there's going to be businesses that just go, forget it? I think there is. I think there's a lot of businesses. We saw that when that happened with exporting to the EU. What do you do if you're a business, that's relied on importing a lot rather than exporting? That's going to have a significant impact on a lot of businesses. But hey, we'll cover that stuff when we get to it. So the deporters do point out that it does make it easier for importers from non-EU countries, but critics have also warned that this is proof that Brexit is now adding to the cost of living crisis. Again, always was going to. And I love it. Oh, it's now easier for importers from non-EU countries. How is it easier? If you've got already, people from Europe saying how difficult it has now become to trade into the EU, why is it going to be any easier for, say, someone from Australia, Canada, Mexico? What's suddenly made it easier? Anyway, Liberal Democrat Treasury spokesman Sarah Onley said, this Conservative government is now drowning businesses in red tape and forcing more costs onto the public, who are already enduring the cost of living crisis. We need complete root and branch reform with the relationship with Europe, and businesses and customers cannot be punished because of this Conservative government's botched deal. The Lib Dems are the only party who will fix the UK's broken relationship with Europe and make sure that businesses and the public get a fair deal. A government spokesperson said, we now continued and committed to supporting businesses, and they now try and adapt to the new border checks to maintain the smooth flow of imported goods. Gee, do you remember all the stories about how difficult it was for when the checks went the other way into the EU, how the businesses were like sending emails trying to get in contact with someone, and it was taking them weeks to get an answer where like they needed the answer now. Gee, I wonder if we're going to get the exact same situation applying again. Anyway, they continued to say that we are working with the whole cultural sector to test this infrastructure and systems ahead of their introduction. Didn't seem to work too well, but there you go. We are confident that such sufficient capacity across all points of entry to try and handle this volume of type of expected checks, while inspectors have now undertaken extensive training to ensure that goods are now treated with safety and care. Well, congratulations. According to some reporting, you don't even have enough people to, check all that stuff and the required number of inspectors, let alone the problems of, once again, there is no legal requirement for you to get checked. If you roll off and someone says, hey, you need to go get checked, no legal requirement. We've talked before about the hilarious smuggling problems of you roll off, you go somewhere else, drop your illegal goods, go get checked. Oh, you're clean. And then, I don't know, go pick up your illegal goods and take them to where they need to go. Anyway, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.